Well, we are now continuing our study of the challenge of secular humanism. Last time we were looking at some of the sociocultural aspects of secular humanism, how it developed. We ended up looking at the Humanist Manifesto 1 and then Humanist Manifesto 2. And we completed talking about Humanist Manifesto 2. Let me share the screen with you here, and we can get back to that. Last time we were ended up here and talked about some aspects of what they're saying in the Humanist Manifesto that tells us a little bit about how they view religion and how they view uh, the freedom of whatever they want to do in the world and so forth. And so we got a little taste of that last time. So we're going to begin here and cover another aspect of this, and we'll have one more in this series on the challenges of modern human secularism. Uh, and then we're going to move on into another series in another presentation. And that'll deal with the engagement with modern secular human secularism today. So for right now, let's 1982. You got the Secular Humanist Declaration, and you have a link. There's a link to that, but if you just put it in Google, you'll can find out more about these things. But they list the things that the humanist secularists uh, believe in, and some of these, as from my Christian biblical worldview, I would agree with. Others, I would not. But free inquiry. I think Christians, as people, should really search for the truth and what's right in the world and things. Look at things in the world with an open mind. Because if I believe there is a God, and so there is, the aspect of the world out there, but I shouldn't be afraid to inquire into the world since it's God's creation. Separation of church and state, if they mean by that what the Constitution was saying, that it can't establish a state church, I would totally agree. But I think here you're going to find they mean taking out anything religious from the public domain, and that was not what the church and the founding fathers wanted, but it's a restriction on freedom of religion, freedom of speech, for us not to be, for Christians not to, be able to say what they want in a public sphere. But they believe highly in freedom, and uh, of course Christians would too. But that doesn't mean you have freedom from just everything. Like there are moral obligations, and we would probably disagree on what some of those moral obligations are. Critical intelligence, I don't see any problem with having critical intelligence. Moral education, but what they mean by moral education is there can't be any indoctrination, for example, any kind of religious indoctrination or teaching about the spiritual realm and things like that. They would say there's religious skepticism, by that they mean you shouldn't give value to religious thinking because it's actually not real, not part of, you can't bring it into the area of what they would call knowledge through reason with the next one there, or science and technology. Um, and so religious skepticism would be a part of that. And they would say that they believe in evolution and they believe in education. Well, of course, as biblical worldview, we believe in education, and Christians who really push the educational agenda from the first century on and established the first universities in the U.S. by far. Christianity has been at the forefront of religious education, even pushing for public education years ago. So there was a lot of things we wouldn't be disagreeable to, but there would be other things we might be. But that's secular humanist declaration. Then in 2002, you get the Secular Coalition. It represents 19, at least at last time I looked, 19 secular humanist groups that are members of the organization. They state their mission is to increase the visibility of and respect of non-theistic viewpoints in the United States and strengthen the secular character of our government. So they make it very plain. They have a secular agenda. They want religion out of everything, and their view is non-theistic. So I just listed a few: American Atheist Society, American Humanist Association, Atheist Alliance of America, Secular Student Alliance, Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science, and others would be in that group. So what you can see is it's secular humanism isn't just something that's happening by itself only. There are people that are ideologically committed to it. And as such, they put organizations together that push their agenda, lobby in Congress, uh, bring lawsuits when they think religion is involved in things that shouldn't be involved in from their perspective. But we're saying, that, prayer was taken out of school, but now the Supreme Court's reversing somewhat by saying, no, the coach could pray after a ball game, and there was nothing wrong. It was a free expression of his religion and of speech. So, but their agenda is to secularize things as much as they possibly can in all segments. Then you have Humanist Manifesto 3 that came out in 2003. For the most part, it's a rehash of Manifesto 2. They do put forward the self-existence of nature. They re-emphasize the denial of supernatural, the finality of death. They do maybe spend a little more time on the idea of religion comes from interaction with the natural environment. This is what we covered in a previous lecture, the subjective or psychological and evolutionary approach to religion, saying, religion isn't real, God isn't real, so it's just a manifestation of our subconscious in various ways, dreams, or we have a neurotic need for a father figure that's perfect. And so that is aspect of it. I'm including a video here from YouTube, Christianity versus Secular Humanism, and this is Leo Gamont, and he's going to talk about secular humanism as a religion and a strongly held belief system, which he would say is religion. And we have taken the position in this course on our definition of religion that secular humanism is a worldview, but not a religion. He's going to take a different tack and say, well, it can be classed as religion because it's a belief system. Well, that broadens out the whole. Many people can have belief systems. They can believe that you should, worship Elvis Presley, and that's a belief system. I just don't think that's the best way to approach that. But just so you know, he's doing that. But what he has to say between the difference between secularism, secular humanism, and Christianity is interesting and helpful, I think. So I'll let you listen to him for about 5 minutes, and then we'll get back to the lecture.
There is another worldview that is actually universal in its religious appeal. It is the enemy of all organized religion because it masquerades as a non-religion. However, there's no such thing as a non-religion because all worldviews are religious in nature. In fact, worldviews are essentially defined by their perception of God. This non-religion religion is known as secular humanism, which can be defined as a religion where man is his own. Secular humanism advances the lie that there is no need for God. It should make sense that the most hated target would be that religion which offers the truth about God and how he loves the world so much and he is willing to come down. Christianity places Jesus as God in the center of all things. Secular humanism places man at the center of it. Man is in control. It's man explodes. Christianity puts its faith in God's creative ability to look for secular humans. They put their faith in institutions that are advancing man's central position within that world. It's not God's central position, but man's central position that is being constantly advanced and reinforced for secular humanism. To the secular humanist, truth is not actually. It's a matter of opinion or whatever anyone, has determined is good for them. Yet there seems to be no lack of enthusiasm for pushing this invented position upon others, often with a zeal that makes it the most virulent of religions. Even though secular humanism may promote itself as not being a religion, the reality is that it is a religion, as it is a belief system, indeed a belief system of very strong convictions. As a matter of fact, you can prove that by challenging someone who is a practitioner of secular humanism. You're likely to find pretty deep as how far their tolerance and understanding that goes. You'll find out in a hurry just how religious they really are. And they will jump all over you because you step on their beliefs. You'll challenge a worldview that establishes itself as right because it says so. One of the very first things that ever happened in terms of my Christian life was when I was sitting in the university biology class 20 years ago. A polite young man stood up and challenged the professor on his deliberate evolution. I wasn't a Christian at the time, but I admired the man's courage. He obtained the professor's acknowledgement, stood up and challenged him by saying, "Are you not presenting this as though it's a fact, when it may not actually be one? Could it not just one possible explanation for how things have come to be?" Now, strange as it may sound, the professor answered by asking him, "Are you a Christian?" The young man, being an honest person, I suppose, said, "Yes, I am." Then I was bewildered as I watched the professor verbally rip his Now, people have always been important. When I saw what transpired between the professor and the student, I realized, no, maybe evolution is a whole lot of religion and not that much science. Because if it was science, it should be able to take criticism. But if it's religion, we'll fight. We'll fight over our beliefs and drop the habit. Another point that I have to make is that when we consider the message of the Christian faith, it is inclusive of all people. We are taught to love everyone, to be representatives of God Himself, to carry on with the ministry of love and forgiveness inspired by Jesus Christ. Therefore, we are to forgive those who don't believe the way we do because they needed the same forgiveness we have in Christ, just like they don't understand. They're just not clear on the truth, likely having invented their own version that others simply accepted what their culture has advanced. In any case, we are taught to love others. We're not taught to fight to kill or maim. Not that we are to passively allow others to rush on over us, but we are always to consider that God loves all, whether believers or not. And we are to demonstrate that love without prejudice. It is our job as Christians to go and to tell the world about the gospel. However, we must always keep in mind that every belief system believes it. Everybody should believe as they do. It is our biggest challenge. It is the universal challenge of the both worldviews.
All right. Well, he is pointing out the different secular humanism and its worldview, and he would approach it as a religion. But given that broad definition of religion, I would disagree that we can define religion that way. However, I think what he does say about secular humanism and the people's commitment to it as a philosophical ideology that they adhere to, and they will defend themselves on it. But we just have to be aware that we as Christians will confront these type of things, and we need to be prepared to discuss them in a way that's a loving manner that represents Christ, because he talked to people that disagreed with him quite a bit, in fact, enough to kill him. So we just want to study and understand secular humanism and its agenda and thinking to help better prepare ourselves for how we can discuss our worldview as Christians with those who are secular. So this brings us to this illustration here. Uh, there's this idea, at least comes from secular humanism, is you put, revelation and God in one box. That's your spiritual box, and and then you have this secular box. This is where reason and self, the autonomous self, is there, as opposed to the sovereign ruler over in the spiritual box. And for like we saw in earlier, they make anything that has to do with spiritual dimension, as something that's not real. And we'll talk about more about that in a minute. But the truth of the matter is, the Bible doesn't separate these two. God created us both as physical and spiritual beings, and we're going to talk about that more. But we have to realize that for us as human beings, we have to meld the two, and not say, as we do in secular humanism, that the human is the one that makes all the decisions. The Bible does say humanity is unique and of ultimate value in God's sight, and everyone's of equal worth in God's sight. We don't want to forget that. But it has to be within the framework of what God wants in the spiritual box over here, and given direction through that. But this gives rise to what we call the excluded middle. A early Christian philosopher, Francis Schaeffer, would call this upper story and lower story. But this comes from one of my mentors in my PhD program, that he talked about the excluded middle, in which he used this term in a different context, but the idea is similar. And what happens is, you put one box, like we said earlier, God, religion up here. This has your faith, miracles, otherworldly problems, sacred, God-centered. This would be, from a secular humanist perspective, not real. This is not real, so you keep that out there. But the real is self, science, sight, and experience, the five senses, in other words, natural order, this worldly problems, secular, self-centered. This is the real. This is the real for them. And so they would say, keep this over here, and if you want and have to have it, you just keep it to yourself. But that's not what God said, but that's secular humanism. And this gives us what I will term here the excluded middle, separating the Christian worldview from being an important dimension of humanity and culture and society. In reality, these two should mix, and that's what God intended. He created humanity as both a spiritual and physical being. And since the world is notoriously religious, it helps to prove the point that, humanity always is looking above itself. And we should take seriously the fact that humanity tends to look above itself, beyond itself. But this should not be separated out as secular humanism does, but should be blended together, to say that we have to recognize that we are both spiritual and physical beings at the same time, and not just designate one as not real. And that's what secular humanism did. They've given this two-tiered view of reality, and the one of the view is that this part, anything would do with spiritual, is not real. Well, with a biblical worldview, that we don't accept that aspect of it. We will blend the two. But this two-tiered view, worldview, has emerged throughout history. Platonic dualism, explains reality. Uh, there's two different sorts of substances, in this case, the material and the immaterial substance. But for us as Christians, there is two, but they are mixed. When we're created in the image of God, we're created with the spiritual dimension as well as the physical dimension. Enlightenment thinking, this is where the more of a separation starts taking place, where they say, well, rationalism, human reason, is the answer to humanity's problems. God is being pushed out, and humans become the center. Now, the biblical worldview, it says that humanity is unique in God, created in God's image, ultimate value in God's sight. Everybody's of equal value. The biblical worldview gives humanity a high place in the world. However, it does not allow for humanity to say, "Well, we're going to put ourselves in the place of God," but that's where rationalism and secular humanism leads to. They will look at science based on materialistic naturalism. So naturalism is the physical world is all that exists. So a secular humanist worldview would say, my perspective is there is only the physical dimension of this world, a monistic uh, understanding of the world, which in an earlier lecture we talked about these dualistic worldviews versus monistic worldviews. And this is a physical monistic perspective of the world. So religion in this two-tiered view is relegated to a person's feelings, subconscious experience, needs, desires, and neuroses, and not necessarily real. And but the biblical worldview would say no, it's real, and it answers a lot of the important questions of life, which science can't answer. And so we have to keep in mind that this limiting of the understanding of the world to a physical worldview uh, has limitations which do not allow um, the answering of certain questions. You know, how do you prove love? I mean, you can't use the scientific method to prove the existence of love. So many things like that. All right. Uh, One of the problems we run into sometimes is holding the biblical worldview is that religion is reactive rather than engaging secular thought. And what we want to do is, those of us who hold the biblical worldview, we're basically saying, we can enter into the discussion, even though we believe in the dualistic worldview of the secular and the physical and the spiritual, we can still um, work in the academic environments out there, even with the worldview, and be able to uh, stand up to reason as well, because part of Christianity is that there is reason, and God gave us that reason and expected us to use it. All right, so there's two-tiered divisions of the result. This has given rise to the secularization of science and the mystification of religion. In other words, secularization of science means science is only done from a closed worldview perspective, that there is no spiritual realm. Mystification of religion means it gets thrown up there into the area of myth and the unreal and untrue type of things. And so you have this two-tier division, being defined more clearly. It's because science deals with the empirical world using mechanistic processes based on certitude of senses, experience, experimentation, and proof from observation of natural law. Where religion has been relegated to faith in dreams, visions, inner feelings, subjective thinking, and exceptions to natural law. Example, miracles and spiritual realm aspects. But when they do that, it's like they don't include the idea that religion actually You have to have faith. You have to have reason. You have to look at what God has revealed, whether it's through biblical revelation or whether it's through natural revelation, whatever it may be. You're using reason. So religion isn't just based on feelings and dreams and so forth either. But that's the tendency in this two-tiered division. Um, Christian worldview or a biblical worldview should dissolve this excluded middle. We don't accept the fact that you can't relegate our thinking and our reasoning up here to the unreal just because you don't accept it or somebody doesn't accept it, and then they relegate it. So we don't accept it as unreal. We accept it as a part of the world as God created it. So we're not confining God to the supernatural realm only, or removing the spiritual dimension of our world completely from our understanding. And you can't read through the whole Bible without seeing God entering into the physical world he created, interacting with it. And if he wasn't doing it personally, he was sending emissaries like prophets or angels. And ultimately, of course, we'll see here in a minute about he does this in coming in the flesh as Christ. So we're not viewing the world as simply a system of autonomous scientific laws. Although God is an intelligent being, he did make the world work in a intelligent fashion that can be observed and studied. It's a rational system. And of course, this is what the early scientists who were Christians started the scientific method and did science with a Christian worldview. It can continue to be that way today. And there are a lot of scientists out there who are Christians that continue to do good scientific work. So it doesn't have to be limited. But we need to be recognizing both the spiritual and physical nature of our world and of people. And recognizing God's involved in human history, affairs of nations, peoples, and even individuals. And this is, as I was mentioning a little bit earlier, preeminently, and we see this in Christ. Christ is God who came in the flesh, and God was basically saying, if you can see Jesus, understand Jesus, then you'll understand me. And so he comes incarnate into the world, and and he interacts. But that's been the whole history throughout the Bible, that God is always involved in national level to international level to community level to individual. Now, talking directly to David, King David, and sending his prophet saying, "Hey, you messing around with Bathsheba, don't and that God's recognizing what's going on." And so we have to realize that that's the biblical perspective. And so we don't accept this two-tiered division of understanding the world as you get the spiritual up here, it's not real, and the physical down here that is real. So when we talk about science, we have the open worldview or the biblical worldview is a integrated and a holistic view of reality. It doesn't just take the proposition and go, only the physical world exists. And we look at the world and say, no, there is a spiritual dimension as well. In this illustration here, you got the physical world in this box dotted line here, just show that it's porous, and the physical world, and you could do your science within this, just having the idea, I only believe in the physical world, but you can also do science through even if you have an open world view. This kind of science is within a closed system, but you can do science observing the world as well, but still maintain an open worldview. They're not contradictory, science and Christian worldview. However, there is an aspect when people make it a philosophical assumption that you have to believe in that only the physical world is real. then there is a conflict, but that's not science, it's scientism. So what's happening then with secular humanism is it's pushing, it wants by saying this is the only way to understand the world, it's trying to push out revelation and God, there, and keep secular humanism as the center of everything, and that means the autonomous self. Humans are the final say on everything, not God. And we, as in the biblical worldview, we're pushing for the mix of these to say, no, there is a secular and spiritual, God and self is there. It's like the Christian perspective, the biblical perspective, that humanity is body, soul, and spirit. And there's revelations, things revealed by God that we might cannot know from reason, but reason is there as well. I think as John Locke said, there are many things beyond what you can reason to. Reason can only take you so far. But there's spiritual physical world involved. When the Bible talks about body, soul, spirit, you have the physical body, but you have soul, which is like saying breath. God animates the body with breath, just like he gave soul to animals too, to have breath in their body. But there's the spiritual dimension as well, being created in God's image, and our spirit, which is a eternal aspect. But even at the biblical worldview of resurrection, has a spiritual body as well as spirit, and so it's a new type of body, uh, and so even there you're seeing that God has this mix all together and doesn't separate out. All right, well, secularism comes from the word secular, from the Latin seculum, meaning generation or age, signifying belonging of this age or of the world, rather than something that's transcendent or religious in direction. Um, so secularism is a worldview that finds little, if any, place for supernatural, sacred, or the transcendent. And we'll talk more about what all secularism carries with it. Um, it represents a philosophical viewpoint that had its genesis with the Renaissance and was developed more fully during the Enlightenment and continues to be developed as we go forward. And we saw all these associations and the manifestos and so forth. So at this point, we've kind of looked at secularism from the ideological and sociocultural influences, from modernization, from the Enlightenment, Renaissance, Enlightenment, on and down into the modern era. And so we've been tracking that. And this is sort of the crossroads aspect of it, that Christian perspective is at the crossroads of a lot of influences from our sociocultural situation in the U.S. You got secular humanism as a philosophy impacting the secular sector, or the knowledge sector, I mean. Evolutionary theory, materialism, science and reason sectors being influenced by that. Modernization has to wealth accumulation. Then you got the popular media that is pushing these agendas. You do have the Christian worldview still coming out of this, and but you also have secular, and this split's getting bigger, it's getting wider, and so we're working in a world that's very pluralistic, not as pluralistic as the first century world when Christianity began. However, secular humanism wasn't one of the views, but secular humanism is becoming a bigger challenge. Out of all the people you might meet if you're going into a new profession or something, you'll probably meet more secular humanists, or people that at least live that way, whether they ideologically adhere to it or not, than you will from other religions. Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism make up a very small fraction of belief in the U.S. Christianity by far is still the largest, but yet secular humanism, or at least people that live that direction, is the second largest group. And so it's good to keep that in mind. We do, in this course, talk about how we can bridge this gap, how we can, uh, why we're studying secular humanism as in the world religions class, is because it is a worldview that has a big impact in, especially for us here in the U.S. And if you're in Europe or a few other places, Australia, you will find this uh, gap getting bigger there as well. And so we're going to continue talking about that. In the last presentation, we'll talk about how we bridge that gap and reach out. So we're going to move into talking a little bit more about what secularism means and the ramifications of the secular humanist perspective. But we will do that in the next video. And so we will, I think in this series, we have this one and uh, one more, I believe it is. So we will pick up there next time. I will bid you good day.